Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Empyrion Galactic Survival episode 184. I'm Enigmas and today we are building a sphere. Well, actually we've already built the sphere, but we're making it a little bit more smooth. It's a very important detail along the road to this construction of the USS Discovery, our version of the USS Discovery. If you've been following the series, you know certain concessions will have to be made. But right now we're in a spot where I want to try and get things as close to the original as I can, given the voxel world limitations and my own skill limitations. And the thought occurred to me it might be helpful too if you could see exactly what we're working towards. This is as close to as exact as I can get. This is another screen grab from a recent episode. Looking at the center of the saucer section, you can see the small ring around the sphere, and then the large ring, you can see most of it, but part of it's cut off. The sphere isn't completely a sphere. It's mostly a sphere, and then that little dome you see on the top that's got like the blue segmented area, that's the ceiling, I guess you could say, of the bridge. And then that area in the front that's kind of blacked out, you can't really see much of it, that's the window that you would be looking out if you were standing on the bridge looking forward. So it's kind of an important part of the ship, and I wanted to make sure that I gave it its just desserts. And by the time we're done, I think it'll be clear just why I decided to make things the size that they are, because it's going to be, I think, kind of tough actually to get the bridge to the appropriate size so that you could be standing on it in the game and feel like you were in a room as large as the bridge on the actual ship. There's only so much that we can do. We'll be referring back to this image in future episodes, probably in the next episode as well, so that we can look at that structure that's holding that sphere inside the middle of the smaller ring, extending back to the central portion of the hull. All of that having been said, this process in a voxel world of taking a sphere that's made out of cubes and trying to make it look like something that's a little bit more refined, a little bit softer edged all the way around, is probably one of the more challenging things that a person can do, because what you're really looking at is just one gigantic curve. And it's a compound curve at that. But if you break it down and you start looking at it in the context of things that make sense in a voxel world, it gets a little bit easier. One of the things that I found was a little bit helpful is if you think of it as being a cube. It's obviously not a cube, but if we start off thinking of it as a cube, now we're directly in the voxel universe. We're looking at something and thinking of it in terms that make sense in a voxel universe, and we can use this as the basis to give ourselves a starting point when we're looking at trying to do this sort of thing to such a complex shape. If you think of this cube and imagine you've got 3 elastic bands that you put around this cube. The first one you put around the cube so that it goes across all 4 sides. So it goes around the cube. It doesn't touch the top face. It doesn't touch the bottom face. It's just straight around the middle, all 4 sides. You take the second elastic band and it wraps around so that it touches 2 sides, the top and the bottom. And then the third elastic band, you wrap it around so that it touches the other 2 sides, the top and the bottom. And now you've basically divided the cube into 8 equal segments with these elastic bands that are wrapping around it. That becomes the center point for the beginning of this whole operation. So then if you take that same concept, take those elastic bands and put them in the exact same position, only on a sphere. So you've got one band that goes all the way around the equator, one band that goes all the way around 90 degrees perpendicular to the equator, and then another one that goes around the other 2 sides. Just like we were talking with the cube. What you've just described, what you've just put the focus on is 3 circles. The equator, another circle that goes around the top and the bottom through 2 sides, and then a third circle that goes around the top and the bottom through the other two sides. And you can round off a circle fairly easily. I feel pretty confident at this point rounding off a circle and having it look fairly reasonable, fairly soft-edged, depending on the size of it, of course, and how much patience I have to work with it. But you get the idea. It's fairly simple and straightforward. So you just do that circle 3 times on your sphere, and that gives you the starting point. Now you've got these 3 bands that are wrapped around this sphere, and you just sort of then extend them into the no man's land where they start to eventually intersect. And once that's done, the sphere is done. So that's exactly what we've got here. We've got those bands that are going around the equator. We've got them going around either side through the top and the bottom. And of course, we're using the XZ mirror mode so that whatever we're doing above the red mesh is also happening to the sphere on the underside. It's not a very large structure in this case, and I'm glad, because it is still challenging. Even if you've got tricks and ideas to help visualize and come up with a plan to approach it, the larger it is, the more difficult it is to end up with something that you're happy with. In this case, it's almost in that sweet spot where it's large enough that you actually have room to do some things to make it look better, without being so large that it becomes overwhelming. One of the difficulties, for example, of working with an extremely large sphere is as you start to you do the bands all the way around the different axes, and then you start working towards the intersection points where all of them come together, basically expanding all of the bands. Eventually they all come together, but keeping track of what you did on one face, so to speak, versus the other. If you don't keep them uniform, by the time you're done, it doesn't look like a sphere anymore, because there's differences in the various different areas from one area to the next that stand out when you look at it, because we're used to seeing a sphere as basically this perfect shape. It's there's very little room for error in the way that it's laid out, in the sense that things will become noticeable if things go a little bit too far pear-shaped, so to speak. I don't want to discourage anyone from trying this. I don't want to make it sound like it's this incredibly ominous task that should be left for skilled professionals and me. And everyone else should shy away. But this definitely comes down to another one of those instances where if you're going to do it, if you haven't done it before and you want to take a crack at it, I think the best thing that you can do is go into it with realistic expectations about what you're going to end up with the first time, and just have fun with it and not really place too much emphasis on the outcome. Just go in it for the process, and maybe it'll come out fantastic on your first go and you're a natural, and then that's excellent and you'll be making spheres for the rest of your life. Or maybe it'll be an absolute disaster and you just found that you didn't enjoy any part of it and you'll never try to make another sphere again. One way or the other, I think it's really important to be positive and not be too hard on yourself. I kind of harp on that with this series, but if I wasn't harping on that, what would I be harping on, really? It's have fun, enjoy it, don't expect perfection, because it's a voxel universe and there's no such thing as a perfect sphere in a voxel universe. You can see we're actually winding down this whole process. In that time it took to look at the intended goal for a couple of minutes and talk about how to put elastic bands around a cube, we've almost completed our little sphere project, and it's starting to look like something of a sphere. So the next episode is going to be focused on now modifying this sphere into the shape that we need it to be in order to become the bridge, and in order to come together with that sort of like the arm that's reaching over the other two elements of the saucer section to hold this sphere in place. Basically what it's going to involve is lopping a part of the top of the sphere off and then replacing it with that structure that basically is the bridge. I don't necessarily mind in this case doing that, going to all this trouble to build a sphere, knowing that I'm going to be taking the top quarter of it off, so to speak, on kind of an angle, because we're using mirror mode. So doing it this way, even if we're not keeping the top part, it let me work on the bright side of the ship because the underside is pretty dark, and get the underside taken care of. So it's a win-win no matter what. It'll take a little while to cut everything down, but not nearly as long as it took me to cut everything off to redo the segments where the two rings come together. I didn't even mention that I did that, but I said in the last episode I was going to, and I did. And you'll see it when we zoom out, when all of this is finally together and all the little details are finally taken care of. We'll do a little bit of a zoom out so that you can see exactly what it's starting to look like. And then, like I say, next episode we're going to continue working on this sphere-shaped thing, turning it into a bridge, and beginning the process of building a structure out away from the saucer section so that we can put in the nacelles, and we have to have a shuttle bay in there and probably make it look like there's other useful things that you can do in that central area of the ship. That'll be where we start to drift away from what the actual ship looks like, because we just don't have room to make it that long. But you'll see, it'll happen. So if you want to be notified about that and future episodes in the series and others, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.